Dov'è Albena? Ok, we can start. We can start. Good evening. I'm Michele Bonino, the head of the Department of Architecture and Design. I would like shortly to welcome very warmly Andrés Jaque. Albena Janeva, our professor, will introduce him, and he will introduce also the topic Transscalar architecture that will be the lecture of today. But let me say just a couple of words. One is about being this lecture being part of the A+ lecture series. That is the first year we really set up a school lecture series in the field of architecture, as we have one in the design field, the field of product, systemic and visual design. And this is, I would like to thank very much Cristina as the coordinator of a big group working on this, Cristina Kosha, working on this lecture series. And second, for us is a very appropriate day to do this lecture because we spend with all our colleagues, professors, the entire day in this room to discuss about the future of our teaching. And having a dean, as Andrés is in the School of the Columbia University of New York, is a great opportunity, some way to continue the discussion and get inspiration also from his teaching, his ideas of education. So I thank you very much and welcome you to our school. And I leave the floor, Albena, to you for introducing Andrés Jaque. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I have never seen this room so full in a rainy day, especially a Monday. So it's great to see everyone here. I'm very happy to introduce Professor Andrés Jaque, who is trained as an architect, and he's also an internationally renowned designer, curator, but also thinker in the field of architecture and urban studies. As Michele said, he's a professor of architecture, also dean of Columbia University, the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, GSAP. Andrés is the author of a number of award-winning architectural projects which have made the pages of architectural magazines and newspapers. In particular, in the last 3 or 4 years, your work has been very present in the field, but also in architectural debates, not just in the architectural magazines, but also in intellectual debates in the field of history and theory of architecture. Starting with the design projects, I would like to mention the famous award-winning school, the Regio School in Madrid, who has won a number of prizes and is also part of the permanent collection of MoMA, has been recently included in this collection. Also projects like Babin Yar Museum of Memory and Oblivion in Kiev, the Casa Sacerdotal 2004, Moose City 2003, Place Form City 2005, Skin Gardens Barcelona 2006, Museo Postal de Bogotá 2007, The House is Never Never Land Ibiza 2009, the Escara Vox, a very also acclaimed project in Madrid 2012, Cosmo, a project, Cosmo PS1, a project in New York, which also broke grounds, both in the field of design and cosmopolitical thinking, Run Madrid 2019, and I can continue the list. For this innovative work, Andrés has won a number of distinctions and awards, And I would mention just a few of them. In 2016, he was awarded the 10th Frederick Kistler Prize for Architecture and the Arts. In 2024, he won the UNESCO Global Award for Sustainable Architecture, and I think a lot of students in the room are aware of his projects related to this award. In 2014, he was awarded the Silver Lion for the best project at the 14th Venice Biennale, and again, I can continue a list of prizes and achievements. He is also a very well-known writer and thinker in the field, and I would like to mention one particular book that has been very influential for all of us in the room and very important for me as well. This is the book Superpowers of Scale, published in 2020 with Columbia University Press, and also translated in Italian. I know a lot of students in this room are reading also the Italian version and the English version at the same time. His work introduces important theoretical ideas and methodological insights from socio-technical studies of architecture, and he brings an innovative perspective, an innovative socio-technical and transscalar perspective to architecture and architectural design, and for that contributions, he, I think, is one of the fresh voices of contemporary architecture and a writer and designer that we will enjoy following in the future. I think the best projects are yet to come. And I thank you very much for being here today, Andrés, with a provocative title of the lecture, Transscalar Architecture. Please welcome Andrés Jaque.
Thank you very much, Albena, for this very, very generous introduction. And Michele, thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you. I'm so honored to be part of the A+ lecture series and being with all of you. And I'm also very honored because as a student, I was very, very impressed by the work of Albena as an architectural student. And I remember when she defended her dissertation at the École des Mines with Bruno Latour and a bunch of people that were redefining what was the social and what was the material dimension of the social. And I found at that point that architecture had a lot to do, that was already part of that discussion, and Albena was crucial also in the discussion of scale. So in a way, I thought it was very, very natural to have this conversation on transscalarity, knowing that you're familiar with the work of Albena. And in a way, it's also a discussion of how things, what's the social and what's the, the social. And that's something that is when we want to see the social, I think in architecture, what is the way that is being reflected, what is the way that is being conceptualized and enacted. I think that there's probably other traditions that we have to look, and traditions that have been incredibly influential. This is the 1950s Georgi Kepes, talking about the landscape, but in a way when he was talking about landscape, he was putting together very heterogeneous components in a symmetrical way and bringing together things that could be seen as independent or separate, but putting them or working with them through their associations and their alliances and their conflicts. And for me, it was very much a document of architecture, and I think one that connects us also architects with other fields and other inquirers, and also that would allow to redefine what architecture is, not that much the provision of space, but rather a compositional practice that it's really about providing alliances between elements and entities that are often seen as independent and definitely heterogeneous. The question of scale, it's been, of course, central to any form of for architecture to operate socially. And it's also important to see that while scale is so central to architecture, the way it's being depicted by architects often is being very wrong. And I would say that this was for me very important to work against this project, Powers of 10 by the Imeses in 1968, the first version, and 1977, the most famous one, the one we see here. When we look at this Powers of 10, this extract from Powers of 10, accelerated version, probably the role of the line is something that has been not discussed enough. The frame, this square frame, this kind of abstract line that seems to be producing this illusion of non-discontinuity, is of course something that is moving from one media to another, is actually very present in the way the images were even portraying themselves to these photographs. We always see the frame becomes an architectural frame, the frame is a media frame with the slides. The frame actually comes from this book, Cosmic View by Kees Boeke, the 1957, that happened to be not only a pedagogist, but also an architect. This is the book that inspired Powers of 10, the movie by the Imeses that I just showed you. And it's inseparable, that book, and from what Kees Boeke was doing. In 1945, Kees Boeke wrote Democracy as It Might Be. And he actually, and his idea was that democracy, in its celebration of diversity, was basically making societies lose their focus. He was producing an alternative political form based on consensus and unification. And that is something that he promoted through pedagogy. The idea of this pedagogy that still is very popular in the Netherlands is basically that through education, people could basically be losing their differences and becoming much more united. That's an idea that Kees Boeke developed actually first as an architectural idea. Here we see Kees with his wife, Betty Cadbury. Betty Cadbury was the granddaughter of one of the first of the owners of Cadbury, the chocolates. And Kees and Betty lived for a long time in this factory garden, the company town that was developed by Cadbury. And that's the place where which was actually a town that was managed not politically, but rather that as a corporation where there was no representation and everything was managerial. The idea actually behind, I would say, this pedagogy, this consensus-based pedagogy, this idea that differences, this center in making societies lose focus, was something that they had already tested and explored through the architecture of this corporate city that was definitely not the city in the sense of democratic governance that we would assume cities in the tradition of European cities would be part of. The second or the third element, so if the first element of this movie was the frame, the second was this idea of the evacuation of difference and centering the social. The third was definitely the zoom. Here we see the Pierre Ingenieur zoom that was invented in 1956. That, of course, at the time, in the late 1960s, we know that the Nouvelle Vague, for instance, was using it. Visconti would say, with the zoom, I can do movies without getting too tired, walking from one place to another. But it was also this is a photograph on the book, The Superpowers of Scale. But also, in a way, the zoom was used massively by NASA in the Apollo expeditions. This is in the Nouvelle Vague, of course, but also Nixon. The zoom was basically something that was beyond, it was technical, but it was social, it was definitely ideological. When we see the zoom, we see that it's actually composed by very different lenses. And what the zoom provides is this illusion of a non-discontinuous transitioning from one perspective to the next one. So even though the zoom is actually composed by very different visual perspectives, the aluminum case is produced, and the effect of this non-discontinuous transitioning from one scale to another is producing the illusion that the transitioning is happening without basically the interruption of one technology moving to a different one. That's exactly what was basically happening in this movie. The illusion of a non-discontinuity was only produced by eliminating the perception and the critical acknowledgement of the divides. To the extent that this is a photograph from the 1968 rough sketch, the first version of Powers of 10. This is in the images collection of the Library of Congress in Washington, where we see basically that there's one of the interns, Judith Bronowski, that was working on this project that I have been interviewing for years, was taking photographs from scientific magazines and organizing them according to the scale, and then doing copies of the images for this storyboard. And then by accident, he introduced a virus and an ill cell, and there was this annotation by Chamsins that said, no, let's remove that. There's others that were showing chromosomes of the Down syndrome. And again, there was a note by Charles Im saying, no, let's remove that. So in a way, this transitioning from one scale to another was as much made by inclusion and by removal and exclusion. So the frame, what got to be depicted, as it's shown in the testimony of the storyboards, of the images of the storyboard, was very much a device for exclusion and kind of fantasy or narrativation of something that was supposed to be a scientific account. This is the performance we did that was basically a stress test. We were doing a theatrical reconstruction of these, where many of the stories that were removed from the frame could come out. Like, for instance, the fact that the voiceover was the voiceover of someone that had polio, and that was actually the person who put the A-bomb on the airplane that bombed Nagasaki, and Philip Morris, the scientist, the scientific advisor that is also giving the voiceover, was actually a member of the Manhattan Project, who developed the A-bomb, and then would later become an activist against nuclear proliferation after he visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a scientific expedition or committee that would explore on the field the effects of the A-bomb. He did many other things. He invented this antenna to communicate with aliens in his later life, and he actually got a communication with extraterrestrial life, according to him. But there was many other things, like the whole transformation of the lawn, the grass where the picnic happens, is the result of a patent that was brilliant, that was intended also to remove the biodiversity of American suburbs. The film, the Kodachrome, was actually calibrated according to the image of Shirley, this employee of Kodak, and was never capable of depicting the skin of other people with different skin tones. The hand, actually, that is shown here with the gender expression of a man, as a direct expression of the genes, was happening at the time that in LA there was this huge trans movement that was questioning was questioning gender as something that was culturally produced. So basically, the film, if you put it in a kind of social stress test mode, would bring all these other realities, this multitude of realities that was escaping the capacity of this fictional consensus to regulate the social. And that multitude of presences in dispute, I would say, this arena of techno-social presences, it's the one that I would propose architecture articulates, and architecture that or the politics of architecture, or the politics, how architecture is political, following the beautiful book that you wrote, is probably much more in the way all these realities are composed together across scales, rather than in the political discourse. I was very honored that this performance that we did, that I would say is a totally architectural project in the way that it operates composing these realities together, in the same way that the Images movie was also, I would say, an architectural project, was selected by Bruno Latour, that, of course, very close to Alvena, to open Reset Modernity and Question Modernity. And of course, this is very relevant considering the importance of modern thinking and modernity in the traditions of architectural design. And what I remember that was very, very funny during this moment is that Bruno Latour would explain the exhibition by picking up props from the rest of that's the final scene of the show, and basically literally bringing those entities to the conversation. And I think that's a very architectural also move to bring things into the conversation or in the making of reality as emerging as part of reality. That is what we were exploring, that I was exploring together with my Office for Political Innovation in this book, Superpowers of Scale, that Alvena kindly referred to. A second reference to architecture, modern architecture, that I would like to bring is this one. This is a photograph that I loved because it's so paradoxical. This I took around 2005, I believe, in the least photographed part of one of the most photographed architectural devices ever, which is the Barcelona Pavilion. But surprisingly, when the Barcelona Pavilion is seen like this, right? And everyone's not paying attention, or most people don't pay attention to the fact that the Barcelona Pavilion, even the original of 1929, but also in the replica that was built in the 1980s, had this basement that occupies, in the original version, it had a little basement, very small, where all the plumbing ended. And in the reconstruction, it was basically added the whole basement that would occupy its entire footprint. But when we see, and you can see, for instance, the structural load of the Kolbe sculpture is taken by this column and taken to the foundations. So this is exactly the same position upstairs, downstairs. When we look at the basement, what is interesting is that the visibility of the upper floor, and actually a whole social context in the upper floor, is produced by the invisibility that is, and the whole social context that is produced by the lower floor. So, for instance, there's more travertine slabs than the ones that you see on the upper floor, because the aesthetics that Mies van der Rohe and Lily Reich produced were very much based on keeping the pores of the travertine open. But in the climate of Barcelona, the water gets in, it drags minerals and soil inside the holes, and then plants grow. As a result of that, after a while, the slabs break. And they have to be taken down to the basement, where there's a person that comes every month to fix them up with resin and fiberglass. But that's a process that takes time, so there's always at least 10% of slabs that are broken, and they're replaced by others that at one point will get broken, and there's circularity between the upper floor and the lower floor. Is what happens or is produced by the basement. The same with the curtains. This is the new curtains. This is a few months later. This is when they go back or when they basically end up in the basement. So the basement is basically this device that is inseparable from the functioning, the daily manufacturing of the pavilion as a social construction, a construction that is operating across scales, and that is an alliance between many different things: industries, restoration practices, resin, fiberglass, stones. But the most important, or the one that I like the best, is this little corner in the basement where Cat Niebla live. Cat Niebla is this cat here, and Cat Niebla is, there were mice in the basement, and someone thought that the easiest way to intervene, that's the cosmopolitical design of the pavilion, was actually bring an entity, a technology that could hunt mice, and that technology was Niebla. But because he lived in the basement mostly, in the darkness of the basement, she ended up developing macular atrophia. And she was not seen by the mice lovers because she was hidden in the basement so that they didn't know that there were mice, actually, and someone needed to remove them. But she was also not capable of seeing mice because she developed this blindness that was actually behind her name. She was called Niebla because her eyes were fogged like that. And so what for me is interesting, and that's of course something that is being very much reflected in the field of STS, it's that architecture is built in reflectivity. So there's really not a subject for architecture. Everyone is both producing architecture and being produced by the architecture. Architecture is actually producing the alliance and the assemblage of many different entities, how they interact and how they compose together, or they are composed, they're composed as togetherness is really what architecture is about. And therefore, to intervene in the pavilion, because I was asked to intervene in the pavilion and to do an installation based on this research, was rearticulating what already existed there. Things that would be on the basement would be taken upstairs, things that were upstairs would be taken downstairs. But of course, this is not a decorative only operation. By, for instance, putting the vacuum cleaners, these vacuum cleaners kept being used. So that means that the people, the people working on the cleaning of the pavilion had to make decisions that normally would be considered decisions of the curators of the pavilion. They would decide what is the moment that the pavilion would look in a particular way, how to intervene in this installation. They also became much more visible, and by being visible, also the work of the cleaning that was very invisible to everyone up to that point started to be discussed, and therefore they also suffered the consequences of visibility. But that's what architecture is, the rearticulation of the social in ways that, of course, have a political effect. And this is what is narrated in this book, Miss and the Cat Niebla, that is also translated in Italian. Okay, I'm going to talk now about other things that are probably closer to the political tensions that we're living now. These are two types of glass. Actually, both are quite expensive. The one on the left is ultra-clear glass, this low iron glass that is produced mostly by Saint-Gobain, though there's other companies that produce something very similar. The one on the right is actually the self-cleaning glass, which is also ultra-clear glass with low content in iron oxide, but also it contains on the surface a titanium oxide coating. The titanium oxide coating is something that produces shininess. To the extent that buildings like this is the Heatherwick, the vessel, has a type of shininess that was not known before the use of titanium oxide on facades, these coatings. Actually, last year, you probably remember that iPhone was advertised as titanium because for the first time they added this titanium coating and they added this kind of shininess that was unknown in daily life objects. This is not as shiny. The chrome plating was not that shiny of the Le Corbusier and Charlotte Perriand and Genneret's furniture of the 1929 was not as shiny as this. The polished stainless steel was not as shiny as this. This is a type of shininess that was unknown. This shininess is produced at the molecular scale. The titanium oxide molecules are very, they have a very perfect, I would say, very assemblage. It's basically doesn't leave protuberances. It's very flat. And that means that the water moves very smooth and can wipe the particles of dust on the surface of any material. Not only that, because it's very smooth, it also reflects the sun very intensively, and therefore photocatalyzes particles of that and reduce them to into smaller particles that are easier for the water to wipe. That is something that we've been looking for 3 years now, 4 years. And actually, this is the first time we presented this research, tracking all the territorial implications of the titanium. Because of course titanium is not an abstract, this shininess is not an abstract reality, something that is produced through territorial transformations, societal transformations, material circulations. When we see, and that was presented in the previous Venice Biennial, and now it's going to be presented in the Triennale di Milano in the exhibition on inequalities in the form of a film. This is Hudson Yards, this new neighborhood in New York that was the result of building this platform on top of the tracks, the train tracks on the west. The possibility of covering the tracks was very much possible only through titanium, and I will explain. The trains, basically, as they arrive to New York, they have to break in a very short space of the tracks, and the temperature of the rails very rapidly increases to extent that only open-air tracks can refrigerate. But if you cover them, immediately the temperature would raise so much that the conditions, the living conditions in the tracks, in the kind of covered tracks, would be impossible for humans, would make it difficult for humans to survive there. So in order to refrigerate the space underneath the tracks, there's 16 jet engines that are working 24/7 in this in-between between the tracks and the space of the tracks where the trains arrive and passengers leave, and the upper piazza that is the kind of communication and social space of Hudson Yards, this new compound of very expensive apartment and office buildings and commercial retailing offered. These 16 basically engines is the equivalent, obviously, of 8 airplanes. Imagine 8 airplanes permanently working to make the square viable thermically. They pump the air through the buildings. There's chimneys inside the building. They release this hot air on top. And it's all possible because there's these engines that are dependent on a very particular piece. This one over here, which is the most delicate piece in the whole engine, the one that took decades to develop, and that is only possible in one single material, titanium. Titanium is the only material that can receive all the heavy metal particles that the engine pumps as part of the air and resist the corrosion. So the corrosion, in the same way that titanium is used for many of the prosthetics that are used in bodily components that are added through surgery, is also the material that resists the corrosion, even if exposed to heavy metals, kind of heating it at a high temperature. When we look at Hudson Yards, the way it looks is very particular. It's like this. We immediately identified that there is this shininess that would not be possible even 10 years ago. This is actually everywhere. It's in the glass, it's in the surface of metal. These are actually photographs that Iwan Bam took because he was actually not knowing that titanium was used here. He was already perceiving that there was something very weird in the way Hudson Yards shines. These are photographs that he took as a series that he sent me when he saw the work, the research at the Venice Biennial. And of course, it's the result of the molecules that I showed you. But not only that, it's also the result of things that happen at other scale. The scale of basically the transportation of materials and the extraction of materials in South Africa. Because one of the only places where titanium can be found at the scale that is industrially viable to extract it is on the coast of Kolobeni, on the west coast of, on the east coast of South Africa. Titanium is found in places like this. So it's basically included in or kind of a part of this sand. So the way it is extracted is basically by removing the heaviest particles within the sand, the ones that you see on this hand on the left. Once the particles of titanium are removed from the sun is placed back in the same place, but it becomes very volatile. And as it becomes volatile, it's basically damaging the trees, it's killing the plants and that people use to feed themselves, is actually affecting the lungs of people. What is interesting is that the shininess of Hudson Yards is very much produced at the expense of the dustiness of Kolobeni. The shininess of Hudson Yards, of the surface of its materials, of the vessel, is very much the result of the dustiness in places like Kolobeni. So these two sites are interconnected. The transformations at the scale of the construction solutions in New York are inseparable from the underground mineral realities of Kolobeni, and on the surface of how it is socialized on the surface, and how people living there and their farms are affected by destruction activity. For me, this is basically a way to understand how the social component of architecture, the social material component of architecture, is behind its criticality. We make decisions based on we enact politics, or architectural politics are enacted through the connections of things that are distant, that operate at different scales, and that are gaining continuity or solidarity through architectural decisions, design decisions. But it can be also reversed. For instance, this is the project that Albena referred to, Cosmo PS1, that is a very small project that we did in the courtyard of the PS1 as a result of this summer competition that they used to do, not anymore. But it's intended also to intervene the whole scale of New York. This is the Newton Creek water treatment plant in New York, but actually the toxicity that New York produces every day, the toxicity for humans, I would say, that New York produces, is not treated here, not all of it. Every day there's what is called the poo train that leaves New York and takes basically the trash of New York to places like Alabama or other locations, poor states, where basically it's mixed with the earth. So basically the content of this poo train that leaves New York every day ends up becoming part of the earthiness of places like Alabama, that progressively is transformed by the fecal matter, the toxicity that is accumulated in New York. Again, something that is trans-territorial, that is operating at different scales, but that also can intervene by technologies that are very, very simple, that are operating or confronted by them. This is the water treatment plant that we designed. It was very different. We designed a series in collaboration with the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, the scientists of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and the activists, and John Todd, an eco-activist, very famous in the 1960s with his eco-machines. We worked with them to develop a garden, or a kind of cosmopolitical design, that would make water from the sewage system circulate through a series of design or kind of intervene ecosystems, so that basically what would be toxic for humans would be processed and digested and transformed by other species that would find actually nutrients and habitat, and would rely on those toxicities. And as a result of that, after having the water circulating for 2 weeks, the water would become drinkable, and actually we would drink it as part of this. It was a way to basically plug a political device, I would say a cosmopolitical device, into the sewage system of New York City, and doing it in a way that would allow for New York to coexist with this toxicity, and humans to have an alliance with other forms of life, with other species, that would stabilize a form of, or would allow humans and more than humans to avoid the environmental injustice produced by the poo train, by the whole strategy of segregating the toxicity to poor and actually racialized states. And this is what it looked. But what for me is funny is that, and we introduced here a bacteria that is common in places like Puerto Rico. For instance, there's different lakes where you can find it, that when the water becomes quite, when there's really like the water is not polluted, the bacteria grows very rapidly, and it produces photoluminescence. So you can see when the wind moves the pipes, basically it starts shining like this. So it's another form of shininess different than the one in Colobany or in Hudson Yards. And this is the party, a big party. So what we were thinking is, okay, the toxicity is not necessarily something that should be sent away. It can be actually enjoyable, and as we could celebrate that New York is not engaging in environmental injustice by coexisting, finding trans-species ways of coexisting with its own set. This project, or this approach to alliances between different forms of life and more than human form, or understanding life also always as more than human, understanding that human bodies are not zipped up, they expand into, they are infiltrated by other forms of life, our bodies are distributed, circulate, become part of pipes and rivers and the life of others. The air that comes out of my mouth ends up being blood of each of you, right? And equally vice versa. So understanding that every single human life, it's a more than human life that is collected, that is distributed, that is actually not only life. It's the purpose of projects like this. This is the ocean space in Venice that we've been working for many years, and that is actually an intervention on the San Lorenzo Church. That it's when we started working was this full of holes that I wish that we could keep open, but the whole project is about articulating all these different presences, the different waters, the different woods, something that remains very much invisible, and finding ways to maintain and preserve this biodiversity, this basically develop strategies like these, ecological strategies for all these layers of life to keep being part of the ocean space and to also connect them. These are the foundations, of course, you know about this, but the project is intended to make it possible that all these presence of complex alliances between different species remain as part of the architecture and connected to the public program of an institution that is actually intended to promote a transition in the way humans relate to more than human life through the oceans. And these are many, for instance, these are forms of research that TVA 21, the entity that is running the space, are promoting with scientists, artists across the world collaborating. And one of the things that we hope to have soon is this Parliament of the Ocean, where the information and data and work of all these scientific groups, the artists that are part of this, can be consolidated as a new version of a fresco, a contemporary kind of cosmopolitical fresco of the more than human life of the ocean in the ocean space. And this is also the work that I've been doing with Lucia Pietrogiusti and Marina Otero in this book that we hope to have a new one soon, More Than Human, this should be moving, but anyway. I'm going to now talk about a couple of projects, architectural projects, that are taking these ideas closer to the practice of design, architectural design. And also, I would like to explain the project that we're presenting in the Venice Biennial tomorrow, actually, right? And that Alvena is also doing research there, and other people here are part of. And that is curated by Carlo Ratti. This is the Rambla Climate House, design of a very, I would say, conventional commission by a family that wanted a house in the suburbs of Murcia in an area called Molina de Segura. We were working on this project at the same time that I was curating the Shanghai Biennale, Bodies of Water, where we were trying to connect the bodies of people, and in particular, actually, reproduction and uterus, but understanding them as ecosystemic constructions in the history of in the recent history of in the last centuries of China and Shanghai in particular, and the Yangtze River, and that was the background, the conceptual background in which this project happened. These are the ravines in Murcia, the systems of ravines in Murcia. They are these carved, I mean, Murcia is a very dry landscape with rainfall concentrated in very particular moments of the year. So it rains very intensively for a few hours, and the strength of the rainfall actually carves the ground and produces this very flat landscape with these veins carved by the rain. This is right after the rain. Very suddenly, very soon after, it becomes something like this, but it retains this biodiversity and the freshness that the landscape overall lacks. These are photographs from the 1950s of the landscape of Molina de Segura, this area. You see all the ravines that are kind of a vein system that basically allows water to circulate, and by containing in very narrow spaces this humidity, it retains it for a long period of time, and it accumulates biodiversity and climatic regulation. This is in the 2000s, the same area. What you've seen is that the rapid urbanization was based on the flattening of the ground. And by flattening the ground, the system of ravines that you can still see on the right was losing continuity. So they no longer were effective in making rainfall circulate, and they had lost this biodiversity. They've lost this biodiversity. This is a very tiny project compared to the overall system of ravines, but one that was built on top of a dying ravine, one that has lost its continuity, its connection to the ravine system, because the lots around it had been flattened. It was a commission by a very normal family, but that were very aware of ecology, of the ecological crisis that Molina de Segura is part of, and also who were very close to ecology activists, as the way they all, edaphologists from the Universidad de Murcia. They had already a small network of people, this family with their friends that were activists, with some scientists, and they proposed, or they approached us to design a house that would be kind of an exemplary, an activist house that they could then use to convince others to be sensitive to the realities that they were part of. That's very important because Murcia has a very conservative government, both in the city and the region, for many years now, for decades, actually, almost since the reestablishment of the democracy in Spain. And all these governments had something in common, that they have no interest whatsoever on climate crisis or ecology or biodiversity. So they felt that they could, at the level of individual citizens, get organized to have an influence on the way the region would perceive ecology. What we designed basically is a house that would collect the rainfall and the gray water, something very simple. We developed a very economic system of doing that, so it could be accumulated, and there was this climate crown that would work independently from human perception through sensors that were introduced in the ravine, and that when the conductivity of the soil would increase, meaning that the humidity was dropping rapidly, the crown would liberate water as an artificial climate that could be a reparative climate. This is the ravine, this is the area, and you will see here. These are the sensors. I mean, as you see the soil, you can see that it's polluted, it's damaged, these are technologies that are very simple, very cheap. Actually, the whole system of the crown cost $2,000, euros. It was very important to do it this cheaply. We actually installed it with the owners of the house. I developed this project with Miguel Mesa del Castillo, an architect from Murcia, actually. And this is how it operates. This was built through COVID, so it was great because we could have it took longer, so as we were doing it, the plants were already growing, and this is already after 2 years. But this is the way that we wanted to represent the house, where the people living here, the humans living here, showering, the technological systems, and the earth, and the whole ecosystem, the earthiness of the house was produced by the alliance and the rearticulation of how these different entities would be composed together. And the outcome of this project is probably this earthiness, which of course is not ideal. As you see, it's not like a Pied to Dolph garden at all. It's a process of reconstruction. That's precisely what, for me, makes it beautiful. This is the house, which of course is very, on the other side, it works like a house. And it has everything, like a kitchen and bathrooms and bedrooms. But it's also true that the life here is immediately affected by what happened with the water. This is, for instance, the biodiversity. These are photographs that I keep getting in a WhatsApp account with the owners of the house. Now there's new life here. And it became kind of an activist. This is a poster that we did. Hans-Ulrich Chauvis asked us to do a poster, and of course we did it a little bit like kind of Che Guevara, a new version of Che Guevara, Trans-Species Justice for the Luma Foundation. Another project that it's very much at the scale of something like a piece of furniture, I would say, but operates at a tiny scale of guts and landscapes is the Trans-Species Kitchen that we started working five years ago. And then we presented at the Tallinn Biennale, and then in Flanders, in Antwerp, in the Antwerp Museum. But was very much looking at many traditions of cooking that are decarbonized, that are not necessarily depending on fire or energy accumulation, but rather in interspecies relationships. Forms of cooking that have to do with fermentation, with basically digesting each other rather than exploitation, like how digesting could be a way to provide collective survival rather than some species extracting on others or deciding the sacrificability of others. Replacing carbonization, sacrificability by trans-species alliances it's of course a tradition that is surrounding us everywhere, of course, and that we wanted to empower or to underscore through this Transscalar architecture of the Trans-Species Kitchen that is making the mineral, the earthy, the bacterial, the microbial, the fungi, the algae, the fruits, the insects, humans as inseparable. The design was actually very simple, because we wanted something that was not consumed, that could be set there, and the process could be easily activated without almost the labor of cleaning or things like that, that were very much also related to the disappearance of many forms of living complexity. It was using waste from the stone extraction industry. Only 49% of the stones that are extracted in mines or quarries it's commercialized. The rest becomes immediately waste, stone waste. And we were using this stone waste as that basically marbles that are not reaching the standards of the market to produce this kitchen that would be installed in the landscape, and it would stay there and would actually, you know, when you finish eating, you leave everything there and it keeps eating each other, right? Humans are only one of the species that is digesting here. And if we had to produce a document, a kind of architectural document, we proposed, this is one we did for A+U, a magazine that we worked together, so that we could see this transscalar dimension of this trans-species kitchen, which the kitchen is not the stones, it's all this. That's what I would claim, that the architecture is the alliance between all these things. This, I'm going to pass this because I thought that I had removed this because I want to concentrate on that. This is a new project that we're doing, but it's, I want to keep time for the conversation. Okay, and the earthy togetherness, this earthy togetherness, that of course is very influenced by Latour's down to earth and the whole work on the terrain and the earthiness, the social earthiness that, in my opinion, is one of the most important theories that have emerged in the last decades. It's behind this also, it was very influential in this project, the Radio School that Albena also mentioned, a project that is kind of trying to go beyond the culture of sustainability. So there's no very sophisticated LEED certificate systems or anything like that, with all my respect, of course, to approaches like that, but it was definitely not possible with the budget that we had. But we could think of ecology differently. And actually by, for instance, doing a building that was totally naked, where there was no drop ceilings or additional layers, everything was naked, we actually reduced almost 40% of the material mobilization in the building. We also work ecologically by introducing a process of participation that included everyone, teachers, students, relatives, but also to the design, which for me is the most important. This is the way schools normally look like. When we see what is the social construction behind here, these floor plans, it's very clear that the building is used like an octopus that surrounds pieces of land, outdoor pieces of land that are used to basically, and the buildings are used to make sure that there's something, a community that is the community of the school that is isolated from the outside, from other communities. This is actually surprising, this idea of the seclusive, the exclusive, as the principal social and political role of the architecture of schools is something that repeats in almost every single floor plan. If you Google a school architecture floor plan, you will get basically the same scheme of outdoor spaces surrounded by buildings that are as low as possible to maximize their capacity to segregate pieces of land so that the kids that are educated there are isolated from other social participations and interactions. What we did is very different. We concentrated the school vertically, and we worked with the promoters of the school that was a cooperative of teachers so that the school would not have a playground, almost no playground. There's a little piece of playground. This is what the school looks like. It's very much of a stacking. The typology is very much the typology of putting things on top of each other as a way to minimize, of course, the foundations, but also with the idea that there was a way that this was a way to confront this segregation of kids as they were getting educated. Actually, the way we work is we work very much with the promoters, with the developers of the school, this cooperative of teachers, to help them find the land where they would build the school. And we were trying to find a piece of land that was very close to a park or to an outdoor space, public space, that would enable the school not to have a playground and use the public space as its playground. Actually, the one that we found was amazing was this Valdebebas Park, which is the former landfill of Madrid. As you see here, very much a dirty piece of public space that's still very much polluted, that is crossed by infrastructure, something that comprised all the, I would say, difficulties and complexities of a city now, ecologically, climatically, socially, materially. The idea was that basically through this realism, the education would allow students to be exposed to the opportunities to make their own experimentations and their own judgments and relationships that could actually allow them to make decisions on their own education. This is the first day that we opened the doors of the school, and the kids were actually taking their time, their break time in the park. As you see, the park is very ugly, and that's something that I love. It's nature as it is in a place like Spain, where there's all these, of course, environmental issues that is part of being a citizen, how to deal with it. And actually that reflects in the actual construction of the school. As you see, the foundations of the school have to go through these layers of sedimentation of the landfill decades, basically getting the trash of the city, are the reason why the school is literally built on the trash of the memory of the trash of the city. But what is important is that the school is in itself an actor of reparation, of environmental reparation, of ecological reparation. It is designed, we work in association with Jorge, with Álvaro Mínguez and Jorge Basarrate, two ecologists, to design a series of gardens, tiny gardens like these ones here, or this one a little bit bigger, that were similar to Cosmo designs, so that there could be it would trigger the form of insect, microbial, animal life that would help repair the ecosystem of the landfill. This is something that is coexisting with other uses. This is the gym, that is also the assembly, the theater of the school. This is, for instance, some of the classrooms of the younger ones. But it's very much connected to other projects that we've done. This is the house in Never Neverland, for instance, by basically making the water circulate so that we can nurture these different gardens that are ultimately not doing something very different to this, and that are contributing to repair the ecosystem of Valdebebas. This is the cork facade, and it took us 2 years to develop this in collaboration with VPEC, a company from a tiny town in Navarra. It's cork with a gradient of natural resins mixed with it. It's this thick, it's very thick. We're presenting a new version of this in the Milan Triennale, much more ambitious in many ways. But this for me was amazing to do. This is the plants that are growing around the cork, because of course we want the plants to be very close to the cork, because the plants attract insects and bacteria and microbes of many, and algae, and in the roots we can find many forms of fungi as well. This is the reparation. I mean, this seems very tiny, but the presence of little butterflies, for instance, is something very kind of a milestone in this land. These are drawings, but the school is already working also through the pedagogy for everyone to collaborate in this reparation and restoration of the ecology. But a big part of the work is done by the cork. These are a photograph of one of the kids there. We gave them Polaroids, and he wrote on the Polaroid, "My school looks like a robot made out of butter." And for me, it's very funny to see the shiny towers from Real Madrid there, one designed by Foster and others by others, compared to our non-shininess. But the non-shininess hopefully is getting to be something like this. These are different gardens growing. And you see already the color of the cork changing here. That of course reflects, and this is a detail that is now in MoMA, where we're basically showing that the construction detail is the place where a big part of this reparation is happening. And these are images of this is a few months after the cork facade was finished. There was already the porosity and the cavities of the cork, which has a very particular cell structure, allowed for these fungi to develop their filaments to the cork. This is 6 months later. This is actually the moss, the roots of the moss, the filaments of the moss, dead. You see many of them, of the cells are dead. That's very important because the dead filaments are the ones that are first occupied by bacteria. You see here the bacteria already occupying one of these dead filaments. The bacteria very rapidly develops these, you see these tiny communities. And as we get closer, we can see here already these communities in an early stage. But a while after, we can see that there's already connections between like neurons, similar to neurons. Here, for instance, you see them, you see these things here, from one bacteria to other. Very rapidly, they build this, you see these connections. This is the polysaccharose matrix of the bacteria. This is already constructed, this matrix. So it's kind of a process of scaling down. There's the big cavity of the cork that is occupied by the filaments die, and then there's a smaller cavity that is then occupied by some bacteria that get close to the stuck to the wall, and then they start to occupy this with an armature, a three-dimensional armature. It's a process of materially building an interspecies scaling down through construction. What is very important is that this progressive scaling down, biological scaling down, is crucial because the flows of water and the wind actually kills all this microbial life unless they get an anchoring. So the anchoring is crucial. The scaling down of the void is a fundamental part of providing the survival not only of one species to the next one. And here we see already, you see these algae? These are algae that are finding their home in the matrix that is produced by the bacteria. And they could not live before. As you see, the algae is much more complex than the bacteria in their organic organization. This is section. These are section, these algae. So what I find fascinating is that the schooling itself, the solution of the cork, is providing the conditions for a transspecies or interspecies process of progressive scaling down. And of course, as they are scaling down, they are also scaling up their action in the reparation of the environment, of the park, of the trash that has been accumulated for decades in Madrid. So this is, for me, what is fascinating of this Transscalar architecture, that is always collectively produced, is an alliance between many different actors, each of them contributing to the production of architecture. And as they are, or we are, producing the architecture, we're also produced by it. And this is, and I finish with this, what we're presenting in the Venice Biennial. This is before, this is not in Venice yet, it will be in the Arsenale. But these are stones that we're looking at, and I'm fascinated with this. Let me see if I can play this, yeah. But basically, stones for me are clearly a site where you can easily identify the transition between a paradigm of extractivism and modern, I would say, human hegemony, where the stone is seen just as an inert material that can be sliced and can be killed and plastified and polished and cleaned, versus probably a transspecies approach or a more than human approach to the relationship of humans, or how humans expand onto stones and stones onto humans, by recognizing stones as living entities, entities that are developing, they're ecosystemic, and they have this permanent transience between the mineral and the organic that is produced at many different scales. For instance, this is bacterial life within the stone that is capable of biomineralizing the carbon from the atmosphere, fixing it actually to the stone and turning it into a stone. So basically, the bacteria are producing stone. And when we look carefully to the stone is actually an ecosystem of many different forms of life. This is films that we've been developing in association with Jaque scientists, petro scientists that we've been working with. But I want to show you some images of the stone alive. These are all forms of life that are happening through the stone, as the stone. But the one that I'm more fascinated with is, let me see if I think it's here. No. It's this one. Look, this is really a stone. It's moving. Now, look, this is the stone as the basically microbial life is producing the stone by fixing the carbon from the atmosphere, and at the same time, the stone and the microbial life is producing each other. So this is, for me, what makes this moment in architecture very exciting. But of course, in order to make, in order for architecture to operate, I would say, ecologically now, as a more than human form of cosmopolitics, as an activity that is producing this togetherness and contributing to it, we probably have to make very substantial methodological transformations in how architects operate. And one of them definitely is the way it relates to scale. And I'm happy to be discussing this with you here today. Thank you very much. Is there time for questions? Yes, okay. I'd love to have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Andrés, for this beautiful and mind-blowing lecture. I'm sure there are lots of questions just before we start. So we have questions. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we can continue the discussion downstairs. There will be an aperitivo at 7:30 is being served as we speak. So we can get started with
complaints, right? Probably
yeah.
it would be great if someone is annoyed.
Maybe we keep the tricky questions for when we have a glass of,
Yes, okay.
of Prosecco. Yeah. Maybe I can start, yeah, while you're thinking, I'll start with the question on the concept of re-articulation, which was very powerful, and also across the different scale of the projects that you have shown. Maybe, can you tell us a little bit more about your understanding of the concept, as in both architectural history and theory, we're used to other terms, like the critical gesture of revealing what's behind or what is invisible, or in design and architecture, it's more the kind of the constructed versus the, again, the invisible. So re-articulation and the connectedness between the different entities and scales is a different concept that is here. And it's not just abstract, it's very much performed and enacted in a wonderful way across the different projects. Maybe can you reflect a little bit more on this concept of re-articulation, which is very powerful in your work?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this work, this piece that you wrote with Bruno Latour, that it's the, that was claiming that architectural representation would need time, right? And because when we look at any piece of reality, let's say, it's shaped in transformation. And this transformation is not the production of newness or new realities. Is just the way things relate to each other, and how they relate to each other, it's the way that they are also transformed and contribute to the transformation of others. So I think from a relational point of view, and what design is the intervention of this process of permanent rearticulation. So it's not even the beginning of the rearticulation, it's probably the intervention of process of rearticulation. And that is also acknowledging that architecture is always collectively produced, right? That it's not a single actor producing it. In this case, for instance, for the school, of course, we decided to put the cork there, but the cork was already constructed. The cells of the cork were coming with the cork, and then the process of the fungi, the moss, the filaments dying, the bacteria growing in the cavities of the dead filaments, all that producing their matrix, their polysaccharides matrix. It was also a collaboration of other actors that were co-producing the architecture. So for me, it's always like how to intervene processes that are ongoing and that are processes of transformation. But of course, this is different. What I think is important of your question is that this is different to other ways of understanding architecture. So for instance, the idea of an architect that draws on a napkin an image, and then it's produced by very crafted, skillful craft people or industries, it's very different. And I think we have to acknowledge that there's also disputes, arenas in design that we are part of. So I'm happy if someone wants to defend the other parts, for instance, the napkin architecture, which of course is also an articulation, because I would claim, even if some people think that the genius exists, the genius is a rearticulation. There's bacteria in the works of the genius, and bacteria and industries and curtains and cats and mice.
Okay.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for your lecture. So in terms of material, as long as we are harvesting material from Earth, we will be disturbing some kind of ecological life, myriad of life forms. That's one of the drawbacks we have it here, right? So wouldn't it be ethical if we start harvesting our materials we're going to use from places we do not have ecological life, such as meteorite or Mars?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love this question. Yeah, this is a fantastic question. We could stay the next year discussing this question, right? It's great. There's two parts. I don't think there's an easy way to make a judgment of how to produce material decisions in architecture. I think it's a process that requires politics and chambers of debate and discussion and testing and experiments. And the process of the project of Koloveni is a project where there's a huge lack of representation of the people of Koloveni and their trees and their farms in the design of Hudson Yards. I think the way of intervening in that process I would propose is not necessarily saying we don't do titanium and we have to replace it by something that will grow. Is to acknowledge that there's a political dimension of making a decision like producing signiness out of the expense of the farms of people in Koloveni, without them having representation in the process, without the farms being part of the discussion. What I would propose is that the way to move forward is not necessarily banning titanium, but rather constructing a political frame in which the decision of whether make things sign or not sign is participated by those that are affected by it. And the difficulty, of course, is that there's uncertainty of what are the effects of a process of participation, or basically people not necessarily know that the extraction of titanium is going to damage them, the trees, we don't have the voice of the trees. So the way to do that is a process of experimentation where there's the possibility of testing different options, having evaluations that are participated by those that are part of it. So basically that's what architecture is doing. So for instance, when you think of the project of the house has also materials that are pollutants, but there's an effort to build the house as a process of discussion, of activism, of visibility, where others have the opportunity to bring their voices, where there's a following up of the long-term effects on the environment. That's what I would propose. So for me, it's not use this material instead of this material. It's to have a acknowledge and create the infrastructures for the political action architecture is part of to be democratized, participated symmetrically, reaching to the actors and the entities that are affected and being part of it. Which makes it more difficult, right? Because it's not this or the other, it's not replacing one material by other. I would be very critical with the idea that we no longer build with steel and now we build with wood. Because wood, again, you have to follow the wood. You have to see where it comes from, who's benefiting, what is the victims of the wood, what is it part of, what is, it's not intrinsically different to steel. What is needed is a different process for wood to become part of, any material to become part of architecture.
Hi, thank you for your lecture. And leaving the technical aspect of the project and the creative process in the practice, how about the users? And are they creative, reactive, or passive for you? Or how are they participants in the...
What do you think?
I mean, looking at this, I think somehow they are reactive, not totally creative. Because for me, the users are the local communities that are using the project, I mean, the building and the architecture, actually. So.
Also, I think this is a great question, and the way you formulate it also makes it very, very exciting, very interesting. In a way, it's true that it's great the question user, because use is something that assumes that there's already something built when you arrive, right? You use your living room because there's a living room, right? It's not that you arrive and you have to produce it from scratch every day. And I love that because architecture is never the beginning, right? There's no tabula rasa. So there's always an intervention on what exists. But you know, what I don't like about the user is that it feels that the construction is fixed and you just use it. But the process of constructing the living room is finished, is fixed. And you arrive and you just use it without changing it. So I would say that probably we are co-enactors of architecture, all of us, right? You arrive to a room, you change the position of furniture, you bring your air, your breathing, your presence, and you co-produce the room, right? After a while, it's a different room. So the notion of user, I wonder how easy we could exhaust it as a concept that is helpful. I would say that maybe it's a user co-producer, right? Or something like that, a co-producer would be maybe more helpful. But your question is very relevant because also what local is, right? What is the local community? For Hudson Yards, the local community expands into the sand of Koloveni. It's very local because it's... So what I think is very important for me and for these works, and I think it's a good instrument or tool for architecture to get a better capacity to operate critically, is to acknowledge that that architecture operates in kind of assemblages or enactments that are both relational and material, where the material and the relational become indistinguishable. And I think that makes the question of the user more complex. What I love about the Cat Niebla as a way to discuss architecture is that she was a user. She was living there. You saw where she slept, right? But she was also a producer, but she was also produced by the architecture. And not alone. She was not producing everything, you know. She could hunt the mice because there were not too many, but if there were more mice coming, she would be killed by the mice, right? So she was also collaborating with the city and with the people that is collecting the garbage, right, in the city and many others, and she could only do a little bit. So this kind of collective dimension, on the one hand, of any production of architecture, and two, the fact that users are also produced by the architecture and they're collaborating with the production, I think would be a good beginning to address your question about the local and also the kind of maybe a way to reconstruct what a user could be in these projects. Does it make sense what I'm saying? I respond to you? Okay.
Andrés, thank you. Gracias, muchísimas gracias. I was thinking about Professor Bonino's introduction, so it's going to be hard, I think, but what would a Transscalar curriculum in architecture would look like? Because this is about like changing our mindset, but how would we teach it? What will change?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I would propose a few very categorical things, okay? I think a curriculum that is, instead of speculative, is situated. It's not working on abstractions, but really working with things that can be measured, that can be followed, that can be tested, that can be intervened. So instead of doing a project that is basically a speculative project for Mars, well, Mars could be very concrete, right? Something that is incredibly situated, working with two, working collectively. So working across disciplines with the participation of others that are not necessarily experts, but that have an affection, a knowledge, a relationship with the realities that we're working with, identifying who is already part of that reality and mobilizing them, and definitely not like a simulacrum, but rather like a laboratization of reality. Three, I think that it's also important to work with time, continuing kind of following a reality for a long time as part of the training or the education or and And four, I would say, very important to make sure that the pedagogy is not isolated. It's not happening in here, but it's happening where things are happening. It's installed in the realities that we're working through us. For me, those would be the components. And at GSAP, we're trying to do that. And I know here there's a lot of empathy with many of the things that you're doing here. I feel that we're very close, Colombia, GSAP, and what you're doing here. But my feeling is that this is a total, in a way, not total, but it's a change of paradigm, of pedagogical paradigm, that it's needed for architecture to use its relevance. I always think that architecture could be a little bit like the discussions of philately, or it could be emerging as real, as part of the making of reality. And I would definitely go for the second option.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrés. I was asking you something about the last project of the Reggio School, because you explained us very well the deployment of the availability of this building in adapting and readjusting with the environment, with the users, and we also discussed this. But can you tell us something about any kind of adjustment that you did during the process of designing the school? I mean, if there's, because it's an amazing, it has also an amazing shape and richness of materials and composition of many modules and everything. So is this the outcome of a specific address that you did, I mean, without any disturbance from also the bureaucratic, the institutional environment, or did this kind of environment, the compliance with the cork, or any kind of other adjustments which are also ecological, but probably weren't in the first, the first line of the narrative that you gave us. Did they somehow influenced and, deviate the outcome of the building? Because this would be very interesting for us to know.
It's a great question. I wish I had explained more that. I mean, what you see here has nothing to do with where we started. Nothing, literally nothing. I mean, I should have brought one of the first images that we present to, and that we discuss, but also had nothing to do with what the teachers wanted, and had nothing to do with what anyone expected the school to be. So the school is the totally opposite to the napkin that ends up being similar to or equal to the photograph of, I don't know, the famous architectural photographer. It was very much the result of layers of interaction, experimentation, failure, accidents. And I explain a few things that are what I'm most interested on, maybe, and that were very much part of the discussions and the conversations and central to the overall strategy, I would say, or very, very, very important structure in the conversation, in the network of ideas. But there were many others, and many others that we don't really know because we didn't dedicate enough time to explore or to reflect on. But it's definitely what you were saying. It was the result of the interaction of many people, many things, but also the tools that we were using to incorporate information, to manage it, to show it to others, to make them react. Also the collaboration, for instance, the cork was 2 years of testing. And maybe we have something like 50 mock-ups. Each mock-up is totally different. And many were a failure, and not also something that we could do at once. We tested it on the building. And actually we had to fix some parts because the first, when we started doing it, it cracked a little bit, so we have to change it. We changed the type of cork. It was already kind of considered that some testing would be needed, so it was not a big drama, but we have to polish the solution by testing it, by seeing it how it worked, by also looking at the way it would be executed. So that's a long process, and we would probably need research, we've done a reflection of some parts of the process that are the ones that we consider that are most relevant also to our participation on it. But it's, yeah, your question is incredibly relevant. I would say also that what for me is important is to narrate it like that, like through these processes and through these presences. So I'm doing an effort to represent the process and create the tools, not only me, many people, so that we can explain the project as the result of all these interactions and experimentations. But yeah, it's relevant. It's key. That's the change in the way we work, I would say. And for instance, for MoMA, that's what they were interested. They wanted to show materials that could create a constellation of all these processes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Please join me in a big round of applause for Andrés Jaque. We will continue the discussion downstairs, Sala delle Colonne. There's an aperitivo waiting for everyone. You're all welcome to join.
Can the students of A+ and the team come to the table? Students especially.